Secretary of State, and that would be the one and the only Denise Merrill, who's with me here in the studio. And we were saying during the break, as I ushered Denise Merrill in, this is the first time we've actually had a chance to do this in person. So I appreciate you coming in. I know you Secretary of the State Merrill, you were in Bridgeport today.
Yes, exactly. And I'm down here on my way now to Orange, where we are celebrating the career of Carmela, the registrar, who has been registrar of voters and other things in Orange for 43 years. So God bless her.
And that's a volunteer position, is that right?
Well, registrar is...
Oh, for the town.
For the town,
Gotcha.
Yes. She's been a town employee for 43 years. She
Carmela.
is retiring. She's an institution in Orange, I believe.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure she appreciates you being here as we kind of gear up for the election. I want to talk about the election, and I'm going to hold that until, if you're agreeable to it, until we come out of our next break, because I wanted to focus for just a few minutes that we have during this break, Secretary of the State Merrill, with your reminder to me to remind everyone that you wanted to say a little bit about a constitutional amendment that's going to be on our ballot in all cities and towns across Connecticut this year. Yes, very exciting. It took us 3 years to get it through the legislature and onto the ballot. And what this constitutional amendment would do would be to take out language that restricts us from being able to make changes in when and how you vote. So, for example, people are always asking me, well, I see people in other states, they're voting for 2 weeks. They're voting, on Saturday. Why can't we do that? Well, the short answer is because our state constitution says we can't. Same thing for absentee ballots. You have to have an excuse for an absentee ballot. And, of course, there's been a lot of conversation about that around here. Most other states don't require that you have an excuse to get an absentee ballot. In many states, you just get one if you want one, if you're not, whether you're going to be in town or not. So if we remove the list of restrictions in the state constitution, we'd be able to debate some of those things. So this constitutional amendment would then allow that process to move forward. This isn't a fix. This is an approach to a fix.
That's right. In other words, the language is also in statute. So the statutes would have to be changed if we decided we wanted to go down that path. I mean, 33 states are doing some version of early voting.
And for the purpose of describing, as Secretary of the State here in Connecticut, how would you define or propose to define pre-legislative, arguments and everything that goes with it? What would you define when they say to you, well, Secretary of the State, you want early voting? What does that mean?
Well, that would mean any version of voting before Election Day. Right now, our state constitution says you can only have that election on that Tuesday.
Do you have a date in mind that you could vote as of?
I kind of like the idea of a Saturday and a Tuesday or something like that. I haven't actually got my mind made up. I'm still looking around the country. There's lots of things to look at.
And what are other states doing by definition of early voting? Just to clarify, in my own mind, are we talking about a day, a week, or?
Oh, all versions. Florida does, I think, 10 days of voting. They don't open every polling place, but you come in, let's say, to town hall in every town, or sometimes the libraries, and you can vote anytime during those 10 days. But they don't total everything up until Election Day. Oregon is the most interesting. They do all mail-in voting. They do not have a formal election day anymore.
So you get a thing, you check it in the mail and drop it in the mailbox?
If you voted in the last election, they mail you a ballot, you mail it back, and they have one of the highest voter turnouts in the country.
And we really need to kind of do whatever we can here in the state to get those numbers up, because now here we have a midterm election. We had dismal turnouts for the primaries.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
I think that's the real crisis, honestly. People are always talking about, there's fraud in voting, too many people. That is not the crisis in voting, in my view. It really is that no one's voting. You don't have the same sense that you did in, let's say, my generation when we were raised in like the 50s and 60s. You would never say, I don't think I'll get around to voting today.
Just a quick question, if I may. I don't mean to interrupt. Yeah. But do you think ever it would be possible to have a secure, transparent, confident online voting process? You say Colorado does it in the mail. Could we ever just do it strictly on the computer? I mean, we do everything else on the computer. It's amazing that we can't.
No state has gone to online voting. I am not ready for that. And I think it's because of the hacking problem.
Good point. And we just heard today that Home Depot is... Exactly. So, okay,
right.
Should have thought of that. All right. Secretary of the State Denise Merrill is with us, and we'll continue. If you have any questions, get it kind of, summarized, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask your question of the Secretary of the State Denise Merrill in the studio with me. Secretary of the State Denise Merrill is with me, and we want to talk about registering online. We also want to mention that our Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, is up for re-election. This is her first 4 years. She served in the legislature for well over a dozen years. But first, I want to give Dan in East Haven an opportunity to ask our Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, a question. Dan, welcome. What's your question?
Yeah, I have a question. How come they don't open the polls earlier and they close later?
Okay.
So some of us commute to New York every day, and we get by the time we get home, the polls are closed.
Good question. Polling hours for Dan. Busy guy.
Yep.
Drives to New York.
Great question. Actually, that's all in statute, and that is one of the problems we're trying to solve with this constitutional amendment, because then you'd be able to get an absentee ballot ahead of time, or alternatively, maybe even vote on several different days, so you'd be able to get there. That is one of the big problems we have. A lot of commuters can't get back to vote.
And that's not the way the system needs to work, particularly now when people are so transient and moving, and as Dan suggests, he's on the road.
Exactly. We need to make those changes to accommodate people. We just have busy lives.
And that would be part of what you discussed with us earlier about the constitutional amendment on the ballot. And is this the way it reads? How does it read off the top of your head? I guess that's kind of a tough one. Should we change?
Should we eliminate the language that restricts us for voting just on Tuesday in November, and eliminate the restrictions on absentee ballots?
Okay.
In the state constitution. I mean, bear in mind, everybody, before you all panic, it's still in statute too. So It just allows us to change the statutes.
So, as we say, this is kind of going to the doctor and getting an evaluation rather than the doctor saying, here's the the official diagnosis. This is just a way to overcomplicate it. I know, I'm famous for that. But I mean, it's a way to start a process by which we could examine at least whether or not, like Ken suggests, why don't the polls open at maybe 4 a.m. and close at midnight? Or
exactly. Whatever we want to do, we'd then be able to do.
And that has to be approved by the legislature.
If there's a change. This is really the voters' chance to say, we want more flexibility. I mean, that's what this constitutional amendment's all about.
While I have the opportunity to have the Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, in the studio with me, I would say vote yes. At least let's look at it and see. Maybe if we can't, everything is a compromise.
Right.
So we could facilitate at least expanding it to some degree or some level.
Exactly. I mean, there's pros and cons to all these things. There's costs involved. Maybe it costs more money to keep the polls open. I'm a big believer that technology is going to help us out a lot with all this. So we're modernizing as fast as we can,
With, as you suggest, registration online, but not voting online, because we've kind of come to realize that,
I don't like the hacking thing now.
How many registered voters do we have in the state? About 1.5 million?
No, about 2 million.
2 million.
2.1, I think.
So you've got 2.1 million chances of somebody getting hacked, and then...
Yeah, we're not sure exactly how it would happen, but I don't think it's a chance worth taking, because it's really, the problem is the vote has to be anonymous, so you don't know who's sending it in. That's the fundamental problem. I used to think the same thing. I thought, hey, ATMs, I can go get money. Why can't I vote?
But they know who you are.
But they know who you are.
Exactly right. And back to the registration online, they'll know who you are because you have required at least 2 criteria by which to register to vote online.
Yes, you need a Connecticut driver's license. And that's how we cross-check. We cross-check our file with the DMV file, and then we send a note to the local registrar who then mails you something.
But you also mentioned if people don't have a driver's license.
Right. Then you can use one of those Connecticut IDs that you can get at DMV, so they still have a record of you.
So
and that works too.
This kind of says, I am the person.
Yes.
It's Popeye. I am who I am.
Right.
But if people don't have a driver, there was a little joke there. Went over really big.
Sorry.
The people who you're too focused on your job. The people who don't have a driver's license or don't have a Connecticut ID, does that mean?
No, you can't register.
You have
online.
to have one of those two.
Yes,
then.
that's
okay,
right.
Good.
Because that's how we cross-check.
All right.
Yeah.
We do want to answer your questions coming up right after we take another break. My phone number is 203-333-WICC. You're hearing the voice of our Connecticut Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, and we're talking about registering online, we're talking about voting, we're talking about, and again, I just want to highlight what I think is critically important, an opportunity for voters here in the state to speak their mind when it comes to how Connecticut votes. It's so tight and it's somewhat restrictive. 6 a.m. in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, once every election cycle, and that's it. You got to fit into that box, and there will be an amendment when you get into the voting. I used to call them booth, but I guess voting table now with the new electronic voting, and you'll see a constitutional amendment on the ballot about how Connecticut votes. And I'd recommend you take serious consideration to expanding it and getting more people to vote. All righty. Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, in the House. We'll take a couple of questions and do the best we can to answer them. Cecil in Bridgeport. Cecil.
Hey, Jim. How you doing?
Good. What's your question?
All right. Hey, Denise, I wanted to ask her, Denise, one time I switched my party from a Democrat to a Republican because I wanted to maybe vote for the Republican candidate. And I was concerned about the fact that when I did that, I ended up not being able to vote during the regular election. Is there any way possible a law can be put in effect that if a person wants to transfer over to another party because they may like that other candidate or because they may dislike the other candidate for corruption or whatever, could that person be allowed to still be able to vote?
All right, good question.
Well, actually, you can vote for anyone you want. It doesn't matter what party you're in. So in a general election, you may be referring to a primary situation. In a primary situation, usually one party or the other party is holding the primary. So you have to be a member of that party to vote for the primary. And probably what happened to you is you forgot to switch back. But in a general election, you can vote for anybody you want.
And the primaries, I'm learning, are handled by the parties themselves. The political parties, correct?
No. Only in choosing the candidates. But
right.
That's the interesting part, is that it is considered a public process, even though it is a party-governed event. But this is a public election, so primaries are held by the towns because elections are held locally. But it is, paid for by the public. Yes.
Oh, yes, but I mean, the way by which candidates are chosen and who appears on what line, that's all the parties. All parties.
Yes.
So they have a pretty, in the primaries now we're talking about, very specifically, they have a pretty heavy burden to clarify with the electorate that, if you have a beef, it's not with the Secretary of the State or the legislature. Yeah. It's the actual party holding their primary, and they determine who, when, how, and how that whole thing works. Is it true that they also pick the parties, what date the primaries are held?
No, all that is governed by statute.
Okay.
So it is a public election just like any other. So the polls are open the same hours. We set the date. The date is set in statute. You remember there was a whole fight a couple of years back used to be in September, and now it's in August, and there's all these people that are saying, what a crazy time for
vacation.
A primary.
Yeah,
everybody's gone. Nobody's paying attention. But that was all debated, and that is set by the General Assembly and the governor. Yeah.
And would that be... I want to go back to the constitutional amendment. Would that be part and parcel of something that the legislature could address here in Connecticut if the voters, want our legislature to redress the way and times and places that elections are held?
Yes. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when the primaries were in September, there was one particularly bad primary, I guess, and everyone felt that it was just too late in the year for people to recover from a primary and run in a general election. So there was a big debate. I remember it because I was still in the legislature at the time. And some people wanted it to be in June. Some people wanted to leave it in September. And they settled on August for whatever reason. So that's the kind of thing they can debate and change, although it doesn't change very often. It's really hard to make these changes. To get consensus is not easy.
And because that's a political process, it's a political affiliation process. One party thinks they're giving too much to the other party. The other party thinks they're getting too much. So it can, you do want to talk about gridlock. I mean, there's an example right there. Secretary of the State Denise Merrill is in the House, 203-333-WICC. Again, the opportunity for you to vote is something you should never take for granted. Especially in this day and age. And are you ever disheartened perhaps that, I hope 70% of the population would vote in a general election. Of course, now we're in a kind of mid-year, election. It's not a presidential election.
I think it's a crisis. I really do. I think it's a crisis because a democracy only can function if everybody's at the table, if everybody's involved. And you see it over and over again on these big debates we've been having in our state. Gun laws, for example. People have to be part of the questioning, and they have to come forward with their ideas. And the best way you do that, of course, is by voting. And, this has been fought for with blood, sweat, and tears for hundreds of years in this country. We've had many, many fights about who gets to vote. And, of course, this is the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act.
Indeed.
The blood that was shed over the right of African Americans to vote in this country is not that long ago.
Do you get a sense at all, Secretary of the State Merrill, that youngsters get it today? What's being taught in classrooms? Are you satisfied to any degree?
Absolutely not. And I have been nationally speaking of this issue. Civic education is really not taught anymore the way
civics.
It used to be.
There used to be a course known as civics. Yeah.
Yes. Actually, I passed a law requiring that every student take a course in civics. It went into effect in about 2005, but it brought it back. I think people think it's the same way it was when they were in school, and it's not. There's such an emphasis now on reading and writing and testing, but the tests, it's not on the tests, and that's the problem.
Well, there you have it, our Secretary of the State. Well, we're talking about all things politics and talking about an attempt to get civics back in the classroom. I'm getting a real a lesson here with our Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill. We're talking about ballots. What do we want the public to know, Denise Merrill, about the actual ballots, the physical ballots themselves, as we transition from the old, like being in the shower curtain thing, with the paper ballots and the machines and the technology?
I think what people should know is you can feel pretty good about the machines in Connecticut. We have these scan machines. It's 10 years now. We still call them the new machines, but that's typical Connecticut. They are extremely secure. We do an audit of the machines, a random audit, every single election. Sometimes the towns complain because there's a little cost to it, but we feel strongly that's important. But these machines, the important thing about them is they have a paper trail. So when you stick your ballot into the machine, we still have the piece of paper. Some of the states went to the touch screens like you do with ATMs. Not so good. And they're all now going back to these scan machines. And it's just like, when you take a test, you fill in the bubbles and it counts it, in a way that will spit out the ones that aren't right, have an extra mark on them or something. But we have the paper. So if there's a question and we go to a recount of any kind, God forbid, then we have all the paper ballots, and they have to match.
No more hanging chads or any of that stuff.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So the actual piece of paper that people fill in the dots is saved?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Gotcha. We got a couple of minutes left, about 3 minutes. Let's do a quiz here. Write-in candidates, petitioning candidates. That was always an interesting topic.
Yes, and this year it's been very interesting. We had lots of people petitioning onto the ballot, and I think you're going to see more and more of that, more third parties, more interest from other groups. A petitioning candidate is someone who goes out and, let's say you want to run for a statewide office like governor, you have to get enough signatures from registered voters all around the state, that equals 0.5% of whoever voted last time.
That's
so
a low
in this
threshold.
Case, I think it's very low. I mean, this year it was 7,500 signatures out of 2 million voters. I think that's a pretty fair bar. That's a petitioning candidate. If you get enough signatures, they're verified by everybody, then you're actually on the ballot, printed on the ballot.
And that time has expired for that process.
Yes, that's gone because that would take a long time.
And then there's the other write-in candidate.
Yes, if you want to be a write-in candidate, you can do that. We do require in Connecticut that you register with your town and with the state.
And how do you do
are.
that? Pick up the phone and say, "Hi, this is Donald Duck. I want to run for secretary of
Almost.
Hot dogs and hamburgers."
Almost. You go to your town clerk and you say, "I want to be a write-in candidate," and there's a form you fill out, and you're registered. And then it's up to you to go get the votes, of course.
And then people can write your name in.
Yes.
On the ballot.
They have to write it in. That's the difference. You're not actually printed on the ballot.
Right.
You just people have to write you in.
And just final last question, 20 seconds. Will we be able to see, perhaps on the website for the Connecticut Secretary of the State, what our ballot would look like when we walk into the voting location?
Yes, we have a wonderful ballot tool. So if you go on SOTS, as in Secretary of the State, .ct.gov, you can look up to see if you're registered to vote. You put in your name or just your address, birth date, I think it is, and you can see if you're registered. You can get a picture of your ballot. There's a place on our website where you look up your town. You'll get a picture of the ballot for that town or that section of the town. So you can find out lots of information right there.
Okay. Secretary of the State Denise Merrill in the studio with us to talk about the critical importance of voting. And I'm thinking out loud, too, I'll just add to the conversation, tomorrow is the anniversary, once again, of September 11th. So we should never forget our responsibility to stand up for those of us who know and have experienced people who lost their lives, and in this great democracy, we should never take it for granted because it could be taken away from us.
Absolutely, Jim.
Thank you. Nice work on the part of our Connecticut Secretary of the State. Obviously, I'll be remiss if I didn't say Election Day is Tuesday, November 4th. So thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Nice job.
My pleasure.